NPCs, non-player characters, they're the backbone of any good RPG, but I want to know, what is wrong with Oblivion's NPCs? I mean, they get stuck on doorways, they struggle to perform basic tasks, and they have some really terrible conversations.
They say that Oblivion gates have opened outside cities all across Tamriel. Gods preserve us. What?
So how did this happen? Where did Bethesda go so wrong that made these guys so bad? Well, today, not only are we gonna learn what happened here, we're gonna figure out how we can fix it. Oblivion's NPCs have developed a pretty bad reputation thanks to their ridiculous conversations and overall awkward nature, but these non-player characters are actually pretty impressive. Well, impressive for an NPC. You see, usually NPCs are built entirely around conditional programming, commonly referred to as an if-then statement. For example, if player attacks NPC, then NPC attacks player back. It's one of the most fundamental statements in programming that you can learn, but it can create some extremely complex behaviors. But this type of programming can start to feel really repetitive, especially if you're not doing anything, because then the NPCs will not do anything either. And that's why Bethesda wanted to do something different. They wanted a way for NPCs to not only live their lives as if they were a real person, but to also dynamically make choices that affected the world around them. And so for Oblivion, Bethesda developed their new NPC program, Radiant AI. Now, instead of waiting for the player to come along and interact with them, NPCs had their own schedules and goals, and they could interact with the world on their own in order to achieve those goals, such as when it's time to eat, an NPC will just decide where the closest source of food is and go there. However, this unscripted behavior did not really yield the results that the player nor Bethesda was expecting, because apparently when you tell an NPC to do whatever it wants, it's probably gonna do something illegal, which is exactly what happened, and it led to a bunch of NPCs just stealing and killing everybody, which is not good. My favorite example of this is the skooma den that was murdering the local skooma dealer because they wanted his skooma.
Skooma? Oh, yeah!
However, not all these intrusive behaviors were crime-related. There was one case of a guy who went around and purchased all the armor in his town, leaving none for the player, which is kind of a dick move. All this insanity forced Bethesda into making a pretty tough decision, and that was to tone down the amount of freedom NPCs had in the game to make choices, which is why most of the time in the game, NPCs appear to not really be doing anything at all. They can still interact with the world, and they do still have their daily goals, they just can't act upon them as strongly as they could before. However, some of these negative behaviors do still happen within the game. For example, the character City Swimmer, instead of going to the local pub, will occasionally decide to pickpocket another NPC in order to obtain food. But pickpocketing is illegal. And if you do something illegal, the guards are gonna get you. Now for us, the players, we have a few options at hand. We could either
Pay the court a fine or serve your sentence.
But NPCs don't have those options, which means their only option is to be killed. And this is kind of the problem with the Radiant AI system, because that means that a character who is meant to be alive is now definitely not alive. For City Swimmer, it's not that big of a deal. All she does is provide training in the sneak skill, but there are a lot of characters, and some of them are pretty essential. For example, Big Head, who gives us the quest to find the Fork of Horripilation. Big Head loves forks, and he will often go out into the world looking for forks. And sometimes he'll steal those forks, which means the guards will then kill Big Head. And if Big Head is dead, then you can't do his quest. And that's too bad, because his quest is pretty great. Although, it's not all bad, because you do get to check out his gravestone, which is pretty great too.
Sad Big Head.
But there is another downside to this as well, and that is that odds are you never saw any of this happen, because all these actions are happening whether you're there or not, which means most people will just assume that the game is broken, which isn't true. The game is working exactly as it was designed to. The problem is that it just wasn't designed to handle these situations responsibly. But there are solutions to this problem. For example, we could program it so that way no NPC ever does anything illegal, which would be extremely boring. Instead, how about we program a way for NPCs to go to jail for committing crimes? Not only would this prevent characters from dying to guards unnecessarily, but would also give more reason for the prisons to exist. You know, aside from a place for you to go to jail. I mean, look at all these empty cells. It's about time we put them to good use. Of course, if we really want to see the Radiant AI system at work, then the best place to look would be at the infamous NPC conversations.
You have to admit, this is a good place to live. Friendly folks, I think.
No doubt.
Go away, fool.
Okay, so obviously these conversations aren't very good. And that's something Bethesda seems to agree with, because when it was time for them to develop Skyrim, they eliminated this feature entirely. Instead of having an entire list of possible responses, the entire conversation is now pre-scripted. The only choice the AI has to make is when to have that conversation, which as far as I can tell, is pretty much all the time. And while this does technically solve the problem, it's kind of disappointing. I mean, we still want dynamic conversations because they're really cool. So we need a different solution. And a good place to start would be with the dialogue itself, because right now, they don't really sound like they care about the conversation.
You haven't seen my sons, have you? They went off into the forest to fight those monsters, and I'm worried about them.
That's so sad.
No doubt.
So sad indeed. So how about we diversify the dialogue just a little bit right here? Instead of Valis saying,
No doubt.
every single time, he could respond with something like, I just don't know what to do, except for, with better voice acting. But really the biggest issue is the timing.
Isn't Sirach an excellent healer? A good healer makes for a happy town, and Sirach almost seems like another Nord to me. Good day.
As you can probably tell, it's taken these guys way too long to reply. So shortening the time between each response would go a long way to making these conversations feel far more believable. Unfortunately, these changes won't perfectly fix the NPC dialogue, since there will always be mistakes in a system like this one, but it would be significantly better and less,
No doubt.
Okay, so we fixed NPC behavior and found some solutions for the dynamic conversations. Now let's look at really the biggest problem with NPCs, which is most of the time they're not really doing anything. The Radiant AI system is extremely impressive, but unfortunately, we barely ever get to see it in action. Usually what we see is NPCs just standing around, which is exactly what Bethesda was trying to prevent. But the solution to this problem isn't simple either. There are plenty of mods for this issue, and even Bethesda themselves have attempted to fix this in Skyrim and Fallout 4, but it still feels too scripted. I suppose we could increase the strength of the Radiant AI system, but then we would have the same problem that Bethesda had before. A ton of NPCs committing a ton of crime. Another solution might be to try to make the system more intelligent, so that way NPCs can find more creative ways to solve their problems without resorting to illegal behavior. But that would take a lot of time, and the technology just isn't quite there. A simpler solution might be just to add more subroutines to what NPCs can do on a daily basis. That way, if an NPC has nothing to do, a minor goal could activate, so that way they still have a task. These could be simple things such as visit the blacksmith or spectate in the arena. Of course, this has its own set of problems as well and adds a lot of additional work. Programmers have to program these functions, animators have to create new animations, voice actors have to record more dialogue, and quality assurance members have to test it for any new bugs. Really, when you consider the huge amount of work it would take to fix the Radiant AI system, it becomes obvious why Bethesda hasn't done it yet. But that doesn't mean it'll never happen, just not in Oblivion. In an interview with Gamefront, Todd Howard stated that the next evolution in RPGs is developing characters that feel as realistic as their environments. It's clear that Bethesda has not given up on Radiant AI, and we're in fact just waiting for technology powerful enough to create the system they had dreamed about all the way back in Elder Scrolls 4. So if you want to know about the future of Radiant AI, I would keep your eyes trained on the future of Bethesda. If you enjoyed this video, I recommend checking out the 5 worst quests in Oblivion. Also hit that subscribe button to stay tuned for more deep dives on video game mechanics, mostly in the Elder Scrolls. Goodbye.